All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MPL. Today, I'm joined by my good friend and guest who is returning for the second time, Miguel. You might have seen him on one of our previous episodes way back in, I think, like January, February, somewhere around that time, where we did an episode on the experiences of revert Muslims. And yeah, Miguel, you want to just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself, and yeah, man, take it away.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Miguel. Some people know me as Miguel the Muslim. I've been a revert to Islam for 3 years now, and alhamdulillah, it's been a beautiful experience. Grateful to be back on the podcast, and I'm excited to contribute to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming. The episode or like the topic that we wanted to focus on today was a little bit kind of highlighting our own thoughts on like what Islamic parenting is, because I feel like when I've talked to a few different folks on it, there hasn't really been like a general consensus on what it means to parent well or what Islamic parenting kind of is. I think a lot of people also sometimes just confuse it with the idea of throwing your kids around Muslims, which I don't know if that's something that you agree or disagree with, but yeah, just like in general, that's what the conversations are going to be focused on. But before we get there, I wanted to start off a little bit more lighthearted. I wanted to ask if your parents, or what are some things that your parents have done for you in terms of like your religion or just like your character development as a whole that you're really, really grateful for. So, anyone want to take it away first?
Should I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so something my parents did that I really appreciated growing up, and it's something that kind of made my journey with my own faith a lot easier, was that I could always go to my parents and ask them questions about Islam, and I never got a response that was like, no, you should believe in this just because, and that's that. You're not allowed to ask questions, you're not allowed to argue. That was never a thing in my household. Like I always used to have, and it was actually a bonding experience with me and my parents, to be honest, because we would just have like all of these like super like interesting conversations about Islam. And even when my parents didn't know the answer to my question, they'd be like, cool, we'll find out together. And my dad would literally pull out his books or like do a Google search or something, and we'll learn something together. And so that's something I really, really appreciated. And hopefully I get to do with my kids as well.
Yasmin, you want to go?
Yeah. So for me, I guess it was as a kid, I grew up going for Isha prayer at the mosque all the time. We'd bike there. And that was because like my brother, he would bike me there like all the time. And and I still remember this is like not related to Dean or anything, but so, at times I wasn't able to ride a bike, so like he had a big bike and then he would just make me sit on the railing, and I would hold on to the the bars that you hold on to, and he would just ride me to the mosque, and I was like, I'm like flying. But anyways, I'll move on from that. But like that just came in my memory, so I had to like say it because it was yeah, I can't speak anymore. Anyways, emotional. But that was something very nice, because now when I go to the mosque, like I remember those times and I remember that peace, and that peace comes back and you just feel really, really good, right? And that is something I'm very grateful for, because it reminds me that in order to get that peace, I need to stick to my prayer. So yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I guess I could go next. So I remember like since like grade 6, I was like going to like an Islamic school, and we like my parents. So my dad at the time was living in the Middle East, and my mom didn't drive, so I would always take like the school bus. But in the school bus, it has like 20 students, right? And I was one of like the first like 3 or 4 to get picked up. So I used to get picked up super early. This was like bus used to come at like between like 6:45 and 7, and school started at like 8:30, so it was like really early. And I remember despite it being super early, my mom would always wake me up like an additional 10 minutes early, and the 10 minutes before the bus came, it would always be like her like reading like these 4 or 5 du'as, like morning azkar basically. And she did that consistently every single day since I was in grade 6 all the way until grade 12, and it was like the same like set of du'as and like whatever. And it's been so ingrained in my mind now that like even when I'm like going out to university, because I'm not living with my parents, my mom will always send me like a morning text. Salam alaikum beta, like how are you? Make sure you read all the du'as on the way to like university or whatever. And like it's just like so natural now. So like every time I step out of the house, even like unconsciously, I'm just reciting them. It just happens, right? And honestly, like this is so bad, but like until very recently, I didn't think of even like diving into like what those mean. I just did it. I was like, I memorized that, whatever, I'm just gonna read it. But when I actually searched the meanings of it, it was very focused on like, protection from the evil eye, making sure like, you start off your day on like a really good note. And a lot of people you speak with, they're like, one of the best things you can do in the morning and the evening is that you wake up with like the remembrance of Allah and you go to sleep with the remembrance of Allah, right? So that's something I really appreciate. I really took for granted, not gonna lie. But yeah, that's something that I am thankful to my mom for. Yeah. All right, Miguel, your turn.
Yeah, I think obviously not growing up in a Muslim household, I think the one thing I am grateful for though is that like core belief of God growing up. And that's something that my mom emphasized. Like she wanted to be a nun at one point. So like obviously it was very important to her. And she definitely passed that down to my brother and I. So having that belief in God growing up and being around and praying and stuff like that for me was essential, and especially like dealing with everything that would happen during the day, any tough things that would go on, stuff like that. I knew I could always rely on God at the end of the day, to get through that day. So yeah.
Nice. All right. So that was like a nice, like wholesome way to start this episode. But I wanted to get into a little bit more of like the meaty conversation. And this is a super broad topic. So feel free to, agree, disagree, share whatever you want. But I'm curious what I guess the term Islamic parenting means to everyone. And do you think there is such a thing as being successful at Islamic parenting? Because I feel like oftentimes success is measured against like an outcome, but I don't know if measuring, the I guess the Muslimness of your child, or how like religious they are or whatever. I don't know if that's necessarily a good metric to compare something against, because I personally know like cousins and whatnot where same parents but just like kids turn out different because they have different personalities. Some just are more inclined to religion than others. And so yeah, curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that overall topic. Anyone, please.
I think I'll just jump in on this. I think at the end of the day, Islamic parenting, what it really means to me is teaching. It comes down to teaching your children and bringing them, having like developing their relationship with Allah, so that when they're by themselves or when they're on their own, that their iman is very strong, no matter what comes their way. I think that's on a parent to help establish in the child. Now, having that firm like foundation of believing in Allah and following the teachings of Islam, I think is essential. But it goes more than that. I think at the end of the day, as a parent, it's your responsibility and everything like that to raise your children in a proper way, to teach them everything that they need to do, so that when they have their family of their own, it continues. It's not just a, a one-off thing where it's like, oh, there's one Muslim here, and then their kids are like, oh, I have no idea what Islam is. I never learned about it growing up, right? Because there's so many people I've met that come from a Muslim family, but it was never taught to them. So they don't know where to go to find it. So they either don't believe in it, or when someone questions them about it, they don't know how to answer it, stuff like that. And I think a perfect example of what I think is a beautiful thing about parenting is like you said, your parents taught you the du'as that you'd recite when you leave the house. And I think the beauty in that is every time you recite that dua, your parents are getting a reward from it, right? So at the end of the day, it's helping out your children, and in return, it's helping out you in the long run, right? Because everyone, at the end of the day, we're Muslim for a reason. We believe in God, and eventually we, inshallah, make it to Jannah, right? Like there's things that we want to set up along the way to make our lives easier and better our lives. So yeah, it's teaching at the end of the day.
Everything Miguel said, just 100. But I also wanted to add on to that and say that, like, to me, a part of Islamic parenting is also, like, from a parent's perspective, is emulating the values that you want your children to have. Because if you're teaching your children things that like qualities that you don't have in yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to take those on, right? And so I think like a huge part of it is making sure that you're consistently working on yourself as a Muslim, so that you can show them like at home they have the best version of a Muslim of you that they can like, you know, use as like a reference or like a what is it called, role model, be a role model to them.
You stole my word. I was gonna say role model.
Sorry.
Wow.
You
Anyway,
guys stole everything from me. But I want to add that like you know how Miguel, you said that it should be like you're getting rewards for what you're teaching your kids, right? You raising your kids in the Islamic manner or on the principles of Islam is a form of sadaqah for you, right? You're getting charity. Like it's not, I do not know how to explain it, but like it's sadaqah that carries on even if
Yeah.
if you die. I don't mean to be that like but like you move on in life.
Yeah.
Your kids teach their kids and their kids teach their kids, so on. You're still getting those good deeds, you know? And that for me, that is successful parenting. Also, you know, a lot of us, we are born Muslim and we struggle, like you said, some people don't know certain things about Islam because of culture. And successful parenting is when you can clearly define what Islam is and you do not incorporate culture that basically devalues Islamic principles. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
I actually really like the teaching analogy that Miguel said, and like what I think what both Miguel and Randa said kind of perfectly encapsulates like the knowledge aspect as well as like the actions, because you know if you can teach someone more than what you actually would practice, but also practicing those things that you teach is super important. And like another analogy that someone once gave to me is like, you know, when like Miguel, you're going to be a teacher, right? You know, when you like teach students like a handful of different concepts, let's say you teach them like 5 or 6 concepts, but then when the time of the exam comes, you know, it's upon the student to analyze the question and understand what specific concepts to use, because you're not going to use all 5 or 6 of them. And so someone once described it to me as like a toolkit. It's like you're essentially developing their toolkit and giving them like all of the resources, like potential resources that they could need at a certain point in time. But when the time comes when they're kind of out on their own, you know, they've grown up, whatever, they need to be able to understand what resources they have at their disposal and use the right tools to deal with it, right? And those tools could be, you know, character development, being knowledgeable in your deen, you know, being able to like perform all of the acts of worship, yada yada, right? So that's how. So I really like the mixture of both of what you guys said. But yeah, going to the second part of the question on like what kind of defines successful Islamic parenting, like what are your guys' thoughts on that? Do you think there is such a thing as like being successful, quote unquote, as a parent?
I think there's definitely like I couldn't say it like on a scale if it exists, but I think there's like certain things that you can like check off on a list that would be essential in that. Like I feel like at the end of the day, as a parent, if your kids can go out in the world and be a good example to others as a Muslim, like they pray, they do all these things that, or they make the effort to better themselves continuously. Because obviously at the end of the day, no one's a perfect Muslim. So to say, oh, my child's perfect Muslim, they're straight A's and stuff like that, that gets thrown out the window, right? But I think knowing that as a parent, you can put your trust into your child, that when they're on their own, they're not going against Islamic values. And I think for me, that would be what successful Islamic parenting is. It's like, oh, when they're out with their friends, they're going to make the effort to go pray. They're not going to go to a club. They're not going to go drinking, stuff like that. I think if I can have that trust in my child, then I consider myself as a successful parent teaching Islamic principles.
What do you think, Faizan? You're always putting us on the spot. You go
Uh,
last.
Whoa, I don't like that you put me on the spot here. I thought I was supposed to be the moderator. What do I think? I think like I see where Miguel is coming from, and I kind of I appreciate like your insight, but I still feel like there's a heavy emphasis on like the end outcome, right? Whereas I kind of see like parenting as sort of like a process where, to your point, it's like there's certain things that you should do. Like you should be educating them, you should be putting them in an environment where, like for example, taking them to like the masjid for like isha prayers and like things like that. And then like the process ideally would lead to a favorable end outcome. But I think parenting is making sure the process that you're doing is to the best of your abilities, and the end outcome is kind of just like, hopefully like they end up like turning out to be like a really good kid. But at the end of the day, you can't really control that, because like I said, for us as parents, we're supposed to be giving them the tools and resources. If they choose not to use those tools and resources, then I don't think it's fair to hold the parents accountable for their lack of doing so. And so yeah, like if they're out with their friends, you would hope that you've instilled enough faith in them and like education in them so that they would go and make time out to go pray and whatever. But should they not go out and pray, you're not going to be held accountable on the day of judgment unless they're like 12 years old. I'm like, yeah, okay, you will be, right? But if they're like 20 or whatever and you've done all you could, then ultimately, it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, on the day of judgment, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks you, you should be able to say like, I tried my best. The outcome was kind of out of my hands.
Fair. Yeah. No, I agree. I think what you said actually ties into examples in the Quran where parents, like there's been prophets who are parents and their children go against what they do, but at the same time, it's like they did everything they could. So yeah, I kind of agree with what you said. The process is what's more important as opposed to the outcome, because the outcome at the end of the day is already written. So
Yeah. What
I want to add, like, I love what you said, Miguel, because like if you look at Prophet Lut alayhi salam, his own wife was like went against him, right? And that's your wife. That's like the closest thing to you. And Nuh alayhi salam, his son was against him. Like you spend your entire time, you can only do what you can. You can give as much as you can, but there is a limit. Like you can't control a 20-year-old. You can't change their values and their thoughts. They are who they are then. But what you can do is from the beginning try your best. And I think um as parents we need to do that, and we need to work really hard on that. And then um I don't like saying leave it to Allah then after, but like you did your best and now it's their path towards Allah, right?
And honestly, just pray for your kids. Like prayer
Mhm.
goes a long way. So
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't know if this is like a hadith or like if I just heard this, so like don't like quote me on this, but I've heard that like the power in the dua of a father is so immensely high. And so especially for like, the future fathers, it's like really, really important for you to like pray for your kids and pray for that they turn out really well, and like pray for their well-being and all of that. So yeah. Okay, now kind of shifting the topic a little bit from like, I guess more like conceptual. One of the things that I've personally noticed in kind of my few years at Islamic school, and I don't know if Yasmin could relate to this, but I feel like sometimes parents, what they do is they will, they have the money, like, alhamdulillah, they put their kids in this Islamic environment, they put them in an Islamic school, but they kind of leave it at that. Like they kind of almost offload like the parenting responsibilities to the teachers and whoever else is there at the Islamic school. And within the home, it's like there's no additional work that's actually put in from their end. They're not actually sitting down with them, educating them, showing them how it is like to be a good Muslim, whatever. And so that's kind of a trend that I've noticed like more in like Islamic schools. So what are your thoughts on kind of placing your kids in an Islamic environment and like hoping that it works out? And do you think that's enough, or do you think that, there should be something additional? Because I can also understand the parents who do that, because, parents are busy, you know what I mean? Like they have things to do as well. And so, yeah, just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna go first on this one because I have a lot to say. Um, First thing is that yes, you send your child to school and everything, but when they come home, you have to work 10 times harder on them. Like like I look at my nieces and nephews, and I don't think if my sister had just left them the way, like just left them at school like that, they wouldn't have that motivation to memorize the Quran or that kind of stuff, you know. And when growing up, my mom would always say, your teacher is the level of your mother. And when I think about that now, I'm like, my teacher put so much hard work on me. Like she had to do a lot of hard work to get me where I am in school. But then coming home, my mom had to do the same thing, right? And for me, like in my head, my mom put those two things at the same level. That showed that I had to give that amount of respect to both parties, and I also had to work as much hard towards my dean and towards my schoolwork. Second thing is that I know a lot of parents who've done this, and literally we all went to high school then, and I'll say that maybe 3 or 4 of us from my grade are still Muslim. Not unfortunately, alhamdulillah, we are Muslim, but it's sad to know that the person that used to give adhan every day is not Muslim anymore, you know? And that I can see, it's because the parents just left the responsibility to the school, right? And sorry, just give me 1 second. I need to read the question one more time. Okay, so yeah, and those same parents, you would go to their house and everything, blasting music, you know, pool parties, everything like that, and mixed parties, you know. You you're going to go teach your kid an environment. You're telling them they're Muslim, but what is this hypocrisy? You're teaching them hypocrisy. You're teaching them that it's okay to live 2 lives. Right? Am I making sense? I'm just really nervous right now.
Why are you nervous?
Okay, because I'm
It's
like
literally
dripping in sweat right now.
It's literally your podcast.
Huh?
You are on your own podcast. Why are you nervous?
I don't know, man. Like I'm saying, today is a bad day. That's all. But yeah. And thinking about all these, okay, going back now, thinking about all these cases, I feel very much scared that I don't want to do that to my kids, right? I don't want my kids to leave Islam. Yes, it's on them. It's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I still have that fear. And like I've made this the condition that, you know, I'm the moment my kids start school or something and they hit a certain age, I'll start working again, but I'm not working because I need to make sure that they come home and I am not a hypocrite, because I hate hypocrisy. And like when you read Surah Al-Baqarah and you start at the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expresses how much he dislikes the munafiq, the hypocrite, right? And I'm like, I don't want to be amongst those people. And I don't want my kids to be raised amongst those people, right? And I need to make sure that I'm doing as much as I can to make sure that we are strong and we are on the right path for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yeah.
Miguel, what do you think?
I think in short, is Islamic school enough? Absolutely not. I think just to throw your kids in there and be like, they're going to be number 1 super Muslims by the time they come home at 3 o'clock. Absolutely not. I think I personally wouldn't actually put my kids in an Islamic school. I would put them in classes. I wouldn't enroll them solely directly in an Islamic school. I want to put them in public school. Now, based on my upbringing, I went to Catholic school. And when you go to Catholic school, from my experience, you do grow up in a bubble because you're only surrounded by like-minded people and stuff like that. You're all following one idea. And I think when you go to something like a public school, you're surrounded and exposed to many different people from many walks of life, which I think is very important in developing as a child growing up in a diverse community of people. I think that's essential. But at the end of the day, when you grow up in this bubble, it can actually harm you more than it can, what's it called? It can harm you more than it can develop you. And that's not to say that like all schools and all that are alike, but putting them into an Islamic school, I think Islamic education is very, very important. Just to clarify, I think that kids should be enrolled in these classes to learn and develop. And I think that is so essential. But to drop them off at 3 o'clock, drop them off in the morning and then come back at 3 o'clock and expect that's just enough for your child to develop the relationship with Allah and stuff like that, it's not. I think as a parent, especially how I see it is, your kids are going to be a carbon copy of you. As much as like we look at our parents and are like, oh my gosh, I'd never be like that. I'm going to change this. I'm going to improve this. I've worked with so many kids, and I'm going to say 75 to 80% of them are exactly like their parents, spot on to a T. When they're going to grow up in 20 years, they're going to be doing the exact same thing, the exact same attitude, very, very, very similar traits. So at 3 o'clock, when you pick up your kids, you have to also instill those values of Islam that tie into everything. So it's not enough. You have to continue it. And I think being exposed to a public education, for example, is good. But then in the evening, you also have to supplement that with that Islamic education as well. And it's not just like, no, you're going to go to Quran Tajweed class for 6 hours and then we're going to call it a day. No, it's leading by example. That's teaching. It's teaching them du'as and stuff like that. It's surrounding them with like-minded people that you can develop with, like having people that as a parent that you're close to who also have children who are also on that level that you can bring together, that everyone's on that same walk of life together.
I have a quick question for you actually. You know how Yasmin was talking about how in like the people from her Islamic school, they kind of like they're just not like Muslim anymore. Did you notice that while being in Catholic school? Did you notice like a trend of people just kind of straying away from like religiosity as a whole, like once they left that environment?
Definitely. I think as people get older, I think when things are kind of forced onto them, I think people are gonna just kind of like back off and try and find an escape out of it into something that they haven't explored yet, right? So when it comes to, for example, growing up and going to Catholic school, Catholicism is pushed every single day. In the morning, we sing O Canada, and then we do our morning prayers in Catholic school growing up. You take religion courses throughout everything, right? You go to mass. They actually have mass within the school. They do that every now and then. So these things are always pushed onto you. It's always like kind of there. Now, obviously, when you push things on people and force it on them, people are going to always try and find an escape from that if they don't enjoy it. And the thing that I noticed a lot, especially when it comes to religion, when you force it on people, they're always going to back off. Even from my experience, if someone forced Islam on me, I'd be like, no, back off, leave me alone. And I would never become Muslim, right? You have to kind of like you have to like lay the foundational like pillars and then hope that they do the best. Like you said, it's that toolkit. So.
Randa, what do you think?
I feel like I grew up in the States. I was homeschooled up until I was like in the 6th grade, but I did go to Islamic school for preschool, kindergarten, and 1st grade, I think. And I would say that I would put my kids into Islamic school, but I wouldn't make them sit through Islamic school up until they graduate high school. Like it would just be during like the earlier years, because I feel like those are the years where you really want to build that strong foundation. And I feel like if at home I'm trying to teach them certain things and then they go to public school, for example, and other things are pushed onto them, I feel like that could be very confusing for a child. And so I feel like I would want to form that foundation and then maybe take them to high school. But like Miguel said, the way I would do it is I wouldn't want it to be in a way where my kids feel like they're forced to be Muslim. And I think this is the important part of like when your kids come back home from school, asking them what they learned in school, because something I found with Islamic school is a lot of times teachers will tell you, oh, we believe this, but there's no elaboration. So it is pushed onto you. And for a lot of kids, that's not going to sit right with them. So I would need to make sure that they're learning Islam the right way. Like that's my job to double check and not just rely on how the teachers are teaching it. And I also, and Yasmin mentioned this earlier, a lot of people bring in culture and religion. I don't know if all the teachers at the school are like very explicitly creating that, you know, differentiating that, because I don't want my kids to be absorbing, you know, any misinformation either. So yeah, I would send them to Islamic school, but they probably wouldn't be there up until they graduate high school. Yeah.
You know, Randa, I'm just gonna add on to something that you said. Like, there were times in Islamic school where, like, you know how when we pray and we come back from sujood and you're supposed to sit away, that your one foot needs to be bending and like it needs to be like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like pointing like straight, right? Like
Yes.
your toes, yeah.
Yes. Anyways, so the one teacher, our Islamic studies teacher, she was like, "Oh, you Pakistanis, you do it like this, and us Arabs, we do it like this."
That's what I mean.
And we do it correctly, and you guys are doing it wrong. And I'm just there, and I'm like, what? Like, you're not supposed to be creating division in an Islamic school, you know? And like, there were like even certain things. I'm not trying to go on hating on Islamic school now, but like you're I don't want my kids to be exposed to division and that kind of stuff either. You know, like putting only the Arab speakers in front of the line to get the microphone to say the dua. Like, no. I want my kid to have the chance to recite the dua, you know? So like those kind of things. I don't want them to feel left out. I don't want them to feel left out knowing that they are Muslim, but because they are associated with a certain identity, also that they're treated lower class because of that. So yeah.
Honestly, I don't have like a fully like wait, hold on, Miguel, were you gonna say something?
No, I was gonna add on. I think, especially as like someone who's becoming a teacher, I think that's one of the most critical things is there's like a teacher bias almost with everything. And I think that was a perfect example of that teacher bias that can really make or break a student's education right there, right? Like imagine being that child being like, no, what you're doing isn't good enough just because of where you come from, right? Like, oh, this is better this way because we're out of like, that's something that like, as someone who's getting into teaching, it bothers me so much because like children are so like sensitive to so much information, and something like that can like just that alone can throw someone off completely off their education, right? Just because the teacher is someone who's a teacher is in a position of power, and children look up to their teachers, and imagine the teacher just completely like throwing where you come from or your background or what your identity is out the window because they want to push their own ideology or agenda. That's not necessarily like 100% true all the time. So
yeah, like one other thing I was gonna add was I feel like in an Islamic school, teachers are kind of held at like a pedestal, and I feel like it's an expectation of them, whether this is right or wrong, I don't know, but it's an expectation of all teachers at an Islamic school to be a source of guidance to the children. And the thing is, when you come in is like I remember when I was in like grade 10, we had this science teacher. She didn't last long. She would like say some like really wild things, and like she was really good at teaching science, but it was clear that like Islamic studies was not her area of expertise. And so when the parents and the administration found out that like she was talking about things other than science, and it's not that she shouldn't have, but it was just misinformation, and she was like pushing like weird ideologies, all the kids were just like really confused. And you know, we're a little bit older, like in grade 10, so like she got some pushback from the students, but still, like to your point, it's that if you kind of expect a person who's supposedly supposed to take care of your children also being misinformed on like a lot of basic Islamic principles. And even then, they're going out of their way to teach you that, even though that's not their area of expertise. It's going to have a pretty harmful impact on the development of your child. And again, I don't know if this is good or bad. Like, I don't know if every single teacher at an Islamic school should have like some sort of like base level of like level of understanding. I don't know if that should be the case or not, but yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. And I think like another thing is I don't know if I would I think I definitely would want to, if I can afford it, like send my children to Islamic school. But the thing is nowadays they're so expensive. And the thing is, because all of the, I guess, like well-known schools or whatever, like there's a few, they're so expensive. There's also now like like newer, smaller Islamic schools that are opening up. And then like a lot of the times these smaller ones, because they're cheaper, if you can't like afford to pay like a really high salary for like a quality teacher, the quality of teachers are also going to be lower because they're going to use that as a stepping stone. Like even when I went to Islamic school, the turnover was really high because they would come in for a couple of years, use that as a stepping stone, and then move on to like going to like a public school board, just because there is, they just don't have the resources or the financial like acumen to like keep those teachers there. And so like a high level of turnover also isn't that good because you can't really filter through like a good pool of teachers. And that's not the teacher's fault either, because like you want to get compensated for your profession. You want, if you believe you're worth something, go and get it, right? So that's also like another thing. So it's like, if you hold these teachers on a pedestal and then also the quality of teachers is like slowly decreasing, especially because you can't afford like whatever like the higher tier is, then especially in something like that, only relying on that environment, oh man, it's probably going to cause more harm than good, I guess. All right, thank you for listening to the episode. I'm kidding. I'm just thinking of like the questions like, do you want to send your kid to some school? I think I would. I just don't know the timeline. Like you guys seem to have like a kind of like a timeline in your head where like, oh, I'd send them like the early part of their like childhood or like the later part of their childhood. I genuinely don't know. Like for me, the way it worked is I grew up in the Middle East. So like it was in an Islamic school, but it was like mostly Muslim people there. And then I went to public school for a couple years, and then grade 6 onwards, I went to an Islamic school, and I guess it worked for me. But I know for other folks that followed a similar journey, kind of similar to what Yasmin said, like now they're not really that in tune with their Islam. Some really are, like some are like really good people, like they lead like Taraweeh, whatever. But then others are just like they barely pray, they're doing like the wrong things, whatever. So I don't really know what the formula is here, but yeah.
I think it's, I guess, what you feel is good. You'll see the patterns with your children. You'll see how their personality is like. Um, but yeah, I'm in the same situation as you, Faizan. I really don't know when I would, but there would be a certain portion where I'd want them to be exposed to the public school lifestyle. And but yeah, like I don't think there is a formula, but I think at the end of the day, it depends on you and it depends on the kids. And yeah, like what are how capable are you to be able to teach them and motivate them and eat your brain, you know? So yeah, it requires a lot of patience. So you'll see, I guess, when the time comes.
Just gonna jump in on and say, like, I don't think there's like a perfect timeline because there's, especially here in the West, there's so many factors that come into play uh, in terms of the education system, especially when it gets into the Islamic one. I think I can really appreciate what Randa said though, especially having them going in at a young age. I think even for me, I'd see the appeal in that, and I'd actually really consider sending my kids at a young age from like JK to like maybe grade 6, 5, 6. I think those years are really essential in getting that exposure that they wouldn't get at like a public school. But I think after that, that's when I'd say maybe switch it up. So because at the end of the day, in the West, we like, it's not an Islamic society, right? So people are going to have to be exposed to non-Muslims at some point, right? And I think when you go to a non-Islamic school or you go to an Islamic school, you're only surrounded by Muslims, right? So I think that's like the only like trade-off here in the West, because I think up till grade 6 or even more, not to bash anyone that went all the way through high school, because obviously there's there's a key element and there's a beautiful thing about being able to go pray at any point in time and stuff like that. On Juma, there's no class scheduled during your time of Juma, right? But I think it's essential for children to be exposed to that part which is Islamic during the day, and then that part growing up as they get older, that we don't live in an Islamic society as well. So
you're bashing me basically.
no, you're an example of how the system works.
You
I'm
know,
kidding.
For me, I think my family would have put me in public school, but there was a huge gap between me and my siblings that they were scared. So they put me in Islamic school my entire life, but I was in so many like extracurricular activities, and they would put me in extracurricular activities where I didn't have any friends from my school that are going there. They'd be like, no, we're putting you in this one instead, just so I could expand my social circle and my skills. And yeah, there was one more thing that I wanted to say, and it was a really, really good point, but I forgot. But yeah, so we'll come back to it.
Wait, could I ask you guys a question / share a thought?
Mhm.
So I understand the appeal and sending your kids at a young age, right? And I'm going, like, what I'm about to say is going off of what I've heard from people. I'm not a parent, so I don't know how kids actually are, but from generally, I've heard that like in the first like 6 7 years of like a child's life, they're a lot closer to their parents in terms of their attachment. They're more willing to like listen to them, learn for them, whatever. And then after that point, they become a lot more dependent on their environment and their social circle. They're more likely to do something that their friends are doing, and things like that. And so if we're going off of that, wouldn't it also make sense to like flip what you said? So like in the first 6 or 7 years, it kind of wouldn't matter if they were at an Islamic school, because if you're doing the right things as a parent and teaching them what they need to learn, then they're likely to retain all of that information. But then once they get into that stage where they're a lot more impressionable by those around them, then it would make more sense to, after grade 5 or 6, to, instead of them sending them to a public school, to rather send them to an Islamic school. And like the example I use in this, like, and this is something that like I've thought about, is like, we didn't have to go through learning about like, homosexuality, this and that, but the kids growing up, they do, right? Chances are they're not going to be taught that sort of stuff. Maybe they'll be exposed to it a little bit in like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, whatever, but it's going to be pushed onto them a lot more as being normal. And when they're a lot older, like going through like, middle school, high school, whatever, and if in that sort of environment, if you're put in a situation where things like that are kind of taught to you more from like an Islamic lens, then it might allow you to kind of explore that area, but more of like a safer setting, as opposed to just taking what you think at face value. Because we discussed that kids look up to the teachers as role models, but I don't think that's only with Muslim teachers. Like I think Muslim kids will also look up to their non-Muslim teachers as role models, and if that's something that's being taught to them as being normal or okay, they might eventually go through like an identity crisis, and they might start adopting mentalities like, oh, my religion's like barbaric and like backward and like whatever. And so just kind of like food for thought.
Should I go first? Wait, no, Miguel, you go ahead.
No, please.
Oh no, you go on.
Please. I'm really curious where you're gonna go with this.
Okay. I feel like part of my answer to this question would go back to what you asked us in the very beginning, about what it means to be a successful parent. I feel like in those earlier years in their life, like up until they're like 10 years old, for example, if you equip them with enough knowledge about their faith that they have the confidence to know that what they believe in is right, once they get into high school, yes, they will be met with a lot of people who are going to question what they believe in. But if you did a good job as a parent to give them that confidence to believe that what they believe in is right, they're gonna adapt to it. Like they're gonna be fine. Because I feel like so you said that like your kids won't listen to you when they become teenagers, they're also not going to listen to their teachers. Like teenagers are teenagers.
Okay, like can I jump in here for a second? That's
Sure.
true. Like it's not necessarily like teenagers, but if like the idea of certain things that go against their religion are so normalized, it's also like your peers and your classmates that are like, they are normalizing that. And so yeah, they might not listen to your teachers, but they are going to be influenced by those around them, right?
That's true. But aren't they eventually gonna go to university? And they're gonna be in a non-Muslim environment anyways.
That is true. However, I think, you know, assuming that an individual has the same level of maturity and knowledge and confidence at 11 versus 18 is very, very different.
For sure. But I feel like that kind of comes with like, see, I'm trying not to project my own experience because I don't think like everyone has their own experience. But I feel like because like I was homeschooled. So the bulk of my Islamic knowledge came from my parents. Like in the morning, we had normal school, and then at night we had Islamic school. Like that was my dad's job. And so by the time we ended up going to school, like I started going to school in middle school, and I actually started going to school when we moved to Qatar. So it was actually a Muslim country, but I was still met by a lot of Muslims challenging me for being a practicing Muslim. But because I feel like my parents did a really good job, like making me confident in what I believe in, it didn't really I didn't really, feel like anyone's like what anyone else was doing or anyone else was saying about my faith changed my opinion about my faith. So I don't know. I feel like it's very subjective on like your kid and like what they've experienced and stuff like that too. It's so difficult. It's so difficult. But
yeah.
Miguel,
Anyone want to add anything?
what do you have to say?
Yeah, no, I because the whole thing is like, I think at that elementary level, building that foundation is essential because in high school, and I'm sure people who went to Islamic school in high school, there's usually two extremes. There's the kids that are taking Islamic school very seriously, and then there's the other half of kids that are put into Islamic school because their parents are like, I have a troubled child, I'm going to put them in Islamic school to correct them. So in terms of saying that going to Islamic school is going to fix everything, I don't think that's a thing, because at the end of the day, you're going to be faced with those challenges no matter where you go. Public school, Islamic school, there's always going to be people around them that are going to pressure them regardless. Because at the end of the day, if you go to a public school, public high school, there's going to be kids drinking. You go to an Islamic high school, there's kids drinking, they're just more quiet about it. You know what I mean? So what's more dangerous, it being in front of you or it being kept a secret? And sometimes the children don't know how to adapt to it because it's like so out of the blue and it's unexpected, right? If it's in your face, you're going to obviously be like, no, I don't want any of this. I don't want to be a part of it, right? Because you can do that because you've been exposed to both sides. You grew up in this Islamic household, Islamic school that kind of like built you up. And then when you go to high school, it's like, oh, those are the kids over there that drink. Those are the kids that smoke. I know about them, but I know that it's best if I do my own thing because that's what I've been taught so far. As opposed to when you're a kid and you're growing up and you're going to a public school, for example, you never really have that kind of enforcement or that, like, obviously your parents can teach you, but like, I think when you get from both sides from the school setting because you're not going to have like a 10-year-old who's drinking, right? You're never going to have that exposure because everyone's going to be taught the same thing. Like, this is halal, this is haram, this is sunnah, stuff like that. And that's going to be essential, like Randa said, to develop that foundation. So when they are exposed to those things, they can hold firm in their beliefs, even if they are going to be challenged by non-Muslims or even Muslims, right? You're going to know that growing up, that this is how it was, this is what makes sense. And obviously it can't be forced onto your kids, but at the same time, they're going to be able to use that toolkit that they've developed to be able to make that difference. Because Islamic education is very subjective to who the teachers are and who the kids are in your class, right? At the end of the day, you could go to a public school and still be more educated in Islamic knowledge than someone who went to an Islamic school. It's like you said, it's like Randa said, and Yasmin said, it comes down to the kid and their experiences and all that, as well as the parent, their experiences, how they allow the kids to develop in their own shoes. Because you can give them shoes to walk in, but if they don't fit the kid, it's never going to work at the end of the day.
I want to I want to add to what you two said, and that's the story that I wanted to share earlier. So one time, like earlier in the summer, my family went to a park and I had Maynards and they were like the sour cherry bombs. And usually as Muslims, when you have gummies, they usually have gelatin, but this didn't, right? And I was giving them around to all of my nieces and nephews, and there are a bunch of Muslim kids at the park staring at me, right? So then I'm like, okay, like I know it's Corona, but like I'm gonna offer anyways, because like you feel bad, and I know being that kid that, oh, I wanted those gummies, like as a like how they feel. So I go and I offer to them, and they're like, okay, thank you so much, but is it halal? They had like all of them. They're like, yeah, is it halal? All of them asked me, and I'm like, yes, it's halal. Yes, it's halal. And ever since that, I was like, I need to go talk to these parents. Like, who are these kids? Who are your parents that you have the guts to even ask a Muslim that is this halal? Right? So then I went and I talked to them, and the mom is a teacher at the Islamic school, but her kids, they go to public school. And they're really, they're tiny kids. Like they're probably 4 or 5 years old, some were 8, but they had the guts to ask me that, is this halal? And then we brought out more snacks. There were chips, Doritos, Cheetos, all those things. They're like, is this halal? And I'm just there, I'm like, wow. And I'm like, hey, my kid's gonna be like you. They're gonna have this confidence to take pride in their Islam and even ask a Muslim that, hey, is this halal? Even though, like, when a Muslim gives you something, you're not supposed to question it, right? But they had that much confidence. And like Randa said, you need to build that confidence in your kids to take pride in their Islam. So yeah.
So moral of the story, parenting is hard. I wanted to kind of end it off by kind of directing a question to Miguel because, like you said, you haven't necessarily had like an Islamic upbringing and you reverted to Islam about 3 years ago. So I'm curious, since you are a revert, what you would do differently from your parents throughout, like your, I guess, Catholic Christian education and, going through like that whole process, and some of the things that you've learned from them that you would continue to implement when you do eventually get married and have kids, and some of the things that you would do differently from them.
I think some things I keep the same, but obviously like implementing that or like instilling the whole belief system that God is there. I think obviously that's essential, especially as a Muslim. That one is like a given, but I kind of have to like reiterate how important having those conversations with your kid about religion and stuff like that are so important. Now, things I do differently, obviously I'd raise them Muslim as opposed to Christian. I think that's also another given one, but that's something I should also mention. But I think some things that I would do differently would be surrounding my children with other children who are focused, how am I going to put this, like with a similar mindset that, for example, if they're going to, how am I going to put this? It's really interesting because like I never really I grew up Christian and my mom's super Christian, and I never had like that kind of like environment where I was surrounded by like-minded Christians, right? Because to be honest, in Christianity, there's not that many that are practicing. There's practicing Christians, but there's not that many. And I think finding good friends as a parent that have children as well that can connect through all these Islamic principles and ideologies and stuff like that that we can all agree on, that aren't even up for debate to begin with, but are just essential. I think that's important, and surrounding your kid with that and having your kids go play with other Muslims, because at the end of the day, when they do grow up, for example, there's going to be times where I think we've all been in that situation where when you're Muslim and you're surrounded by non-Muslims, when you have to go pray, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, do I go pray now? And it's not that anyone's going to prevent you from praying, but when you're surrounded by Muslims, it's very easy to go pray. Everyone's like, okay, we're going to go pray now. It's Maghrib, it's time. Or if you're going out to a restaurant, when you're surrounded by Muslims, it's okay, we're going to obviously go to the halal spot. We're not going to go to somewhere that's not halal. So I think having that environment for my kids is going to be essential. And if I have to create that within my own house and have people come in and other children come in, that's something that I'd have to do, or putting them in other environments, not necessarily tied into Islam, but surrounded by other Muslims as well. So like if they're playing sports, if they can be on a team with that are more people on the team are Muslim, for example, that's obviously a preference. It's not essential, but something like that, creating that environment that there's more people out there, so that in the West, when they're like, oh, majority people don't eat halal or something like that, or they don't do this, or they don't follow these principles, they still have that core community that they can develop as a child that will only get bigger, that they can always go back to and feel at home.
Right. I always wondered, like, because a lot of people say, like, once you get out of school, university, whatever, once you get older, it becomes a lot more challenging to develop that social circle, because often you're tied to, the people that you went to school with, or oftentimes you just become friends with like your kids' friends' parents or whatever. So, like, do you have any ideas in mind and how you would be able to kind of create that environment with, like, meeting other like Muslim parents and things like that? Because I genuinely don't know. Like, the easy answer is like, oh, masjid, right? But like, you're not gonna go to the masjid and be like, hey, does your kid play like under 7 soccer? Like, that's just weird. But I'm just curious, like, have you like given that thought, and like how you would be able to expand that?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I benefit from coming into Islam from nothing. So everyone I've developed with, I've learned how to network and develop people. I don't like the word networking for when you're making like friends. Like networking's like if you're trying to advance in like some business or something like that. But like growing that group of people that you can rely on, I think it comes down to putting yourself out there. And obviously you can be that parent that picks their kids up from school and goes home and does nothing, right? Or you could be that parent that brings their kids to go volunteer at a food bank or something like that. Because there's going to be other people out there. There's going to be other people doing the same thing with families and stuff like that. So typically you're going to find more people by putting yourself out there. That's how, to be honest, how I meet people. I think that's going to be essential to teach my kid, is that they can't just sit back and hope that people come to them. No, they have to go out and meet other people. It's on the last episode of the podcast, I actually mentioned this. Like initially I expected people to come to me and help me, and eventually, like after the first 3 weeks, everyone's there for you, but then that whole like honeymoon phase, like I mentioned, disappears, and then that's when you have to kind of like be proactive and go out there. Like I joined the MSA and stuff like that, and I got involved with that, so I met more people. So you have to find ways to meet more people, be it however endless possibilities that could be. You just gotta go out there and find people, because to be honest, you can meet 1,000 people, and even if it's just one person that you meet out of that 1,000 people that you can really click with, and you find that there's a really good connection, that's all that matters, right? It's not that meeting 1,000 people and being friends with 1,000 people. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's finding that one person or two people that you can keep in that close circle. That's essential, that you can always rely on when you need help or something like that. Having that and bringing that in is what it's all about.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. Now let me know when you have kids. We'll make sure they, play sports together.
A little mini masjid parking lot play session.
Yeah, we'll do masjid parking
We'll have
lot.
a soccer league.
Yeah, we'll have under 5s, under 10s, whatever. The winning team gets to make a guest appearance on our podcast. Imagine interviewing like a 5-year-old, like, so what did you think of the game? I scored. But anyways,
And the wrong net.
yeah. Okay, it's a thought that counts, right? But honestly, those are all the sort of thoughts that I had. If there's anything I missed, or if there's anything else you guys want to talk about, like, open floor. But yeah, I don't know. Anything else you guys want to add, or anything else you guys want to chat about?
But I just want to say, like in Mississauga, you guys have the Muslim Youth Soccer League, and we built it off from Mississauga because the president moved here. And so, like, do you guys still have that?
I think so. Like MYSL, right?
Yeah, MYSL.
Honestly, I think so. There's like a bunch of other like Muslim soccer leagues that have popped up. Like I remember MYSL used to be like the one. Like Miguel, MAA, right? I guess more for adults, but like yeah. So like there's that. Like that's the one I participated in this past year. There's just like a bunch of other like Muslim run things. And to be honest, with the amount of Muslims in Mississauga, you don't even need to go to like a Muslim specific league to find Muslims playing. Like I have a lot of my Muslim friends who just go to like other leagues, and it just like happens to be like majority Muslim folks there. Like,
Interesting.
yeah, there's a lot of Desi people in Mississauga. There's a lot of like Arab people there. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say the same amount, but there's like a decent amount of like Somali people there too. And so like you'll find a lot of Muslims just everywhere.
I think that's just like the privilege of being in Mississauga and like how it's developed over the last 10 years. Because if you go back 10 years, to be honest, Mississauga is like completely different, right? Like in terms of population, because to be honest, Arabs weren't really here before. They were, but in very, very small numbers, right? Like now you go down the street from where we live and it's like you can find 20 halal restaurants, 5 halal shops, 3, 4 masjids. It's like it's so easy to find something that you need, as opposed to 10 years ago. It's like, oh, the only masjid would be like 20-30 minute drive down the road, and that one halal butcher shop that was in like that corner plaza in that very, very small like area. It's like, nah, it's completely changed, and that's just one of the privileges that we have of.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
You
feel
know,
like Randa feels attacked right now because she lives in like a small town.
she's gonna start it there.
Yeah, I should honestly start a soccer league for my kids there. I mean, I hope I'm not living there
Yeah.
by the time I have kids. Oh my God. But yeah.
What's it called? My family and I were talking the other day because my family immigrated in the 90s, and they were talking about how 401 was just 2 lanes, one like northbound, the other one southbound, and or no, it's eastbound, westbound. What am I thinking? North and south. But yeah, literally, and then they're like, look at it now, it's like turning into 5 lanes, and like my mom was talking about like she now feels so much more comfortable wearing brown clothes in Mississauga and like these areas. Like you can literally walk around and like
Hijabis everywhere. Like you do
literally
not feel left out at all. Like it's
when
amazing.
when my brother was getting married, his wife was from Toronto, right? And one day my mom was like, you need to wear Pakistani clothes, and I'm like, okay. And then we go, and then my sister-in-law is like, let's go out. And I look at myself head to toe and I'm like, I'm not going out. And then she's like, no, sis, this is normal here. And I'm like, okay. And I literally, we're going on the bus and I'm like shaking and I'm like, kid, this is really weird. I feel so weird because it's not normal for me. But on the bus, literally ladies wearing saris and like, there's like Somali men like wearing their cultural clothing. And I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. Okay. And so, yeah, I really like it.
But I think this ties into why I see public school as like kind of like that beautiful thing, because you get to see so many different things, right? As opposed to like one kind of smaller, narrow thing that everyone's kind of in, right? Because at the end of the day, getting that exposure, even if it doesn't mean anything, it's still good to be exposed to it.
Yeah. Like even when we like remember the time we played soccer at like that field like near Rick Hansen, like
Yeah,
that group is open to like literally anyone, but like 90% of the people there were like Muslim people, and it just happened to be like that was what it was. But yeah,
good times, good times.
good times. Yeah, I still gotta listen, man. In my books, I got a dub, so I'm happy. We'll play again. I don't know when. But if you ever do like like pickups at like what is it called? Hershey's, or is it called like Paramount now? Let me know.
Oh, Paramount runs? Ooh.
Yeah, bro. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Let's
But
do it.
I'm down, man. But I guess that'll wrap up the episode. I just want to say thank you to Miguel for joining. I honestly really appreciated your insight, and I like the teacher perspective that you brought, because I personally had never thought of that. And like my roommate, he's a teacher, and like sometimes we have these type of conversations, and it's interesting to hear like a different perspective as well. So yeah, thank you for that, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to meet all of you, and good to see you again, Faizan. So
Of course. And thank you, Randa and Yasmin, for doing your job and being here. Appreciate it as always. And yeah, I guess we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace. Salam.
Um,
You gotta cover the camera, bro.
Cover the camera. Cover the camera. Yes.
There
good
we
job.
go.